quote, it was evident that piece of material was stitched. You can see the running of the machine. So it's not like somebody just cut a piece of material and there it was, there were stitches. Which in the logical conclusion is that it must have been a piece of cloth stitched for wearing. 2, and I'm now getting into the submissions that were brought and by the parties. The first accused persons heavily submits on the fact that the shot which has been produced in this court as prosecution exhibit 9 was not the shot collected from his house. And you will understand why that evidence is heavily fought, because that shot is supposed to be having blood stains of the deceased, critical. But the evidence is this, that shot, when it was recovered, it was entered in an inventory and the accused signed the inventory. The argument of the first accused person is that this shot in this court is faded yellowish. I had the benefit of seeing that shot. There is nothing faded yellowish. It is a khaki brown shot. This court was told khaki is not a color. It is a mixture of nylon and others. The color is not khaki, the color is brown. I had the benefit of looking at that white piece. It's a relatively big piece, and one cannot rule out that it may and was the cancer. But I did also take cognizance of one important thing which none of the parties here submitted to. But I am expected as a judge, as a court, to comb through all the evidence. And I did. There was a lot of contestation on the shot. But it was very clear. No one disputed that the first accused person is supposed and was wearing a maroon cap. So a lot of questions was on white counsel, and the brown shot. No question on the maroon cap. Yet, this maroon cap knits and joins right from the house where the first accused left. The house help says he wore a maroon cap. Jenny's at Roadhouse, he wore a maroon cap. Those who were in that house, he had a maroon cap. A maroon cap has been produced in this court. Does the accused person say it's not mine? No evidence to that effect. I have also considered the submissions by the first accused counsel that the cloths that have been brought to this court are generally ordinary clothes that you can't get in the market, and that they did not have any specific identifiable marks that would pin the first accused. And my simple argument is this. Really, when clothes are manufactured in the factory, they manufacture them in bulk. The only way I will distinguish you are, the other day I saw a newscaster wearing I will not tell you who, a blouse like mine. And I'm sure any one of us can speak to the fact that we wear clothes that are manufactured in the same place, isn't it? The only difference is the size. So if you want to say that my clothes have an identifiable mark, then I should put that mark for that purpose. Otherwise, clothes are just clothes. So the fact that this cloth did not have any marks that would say this cloth only belonged to so and so, for me was not a tenable argument. But my findings on that is that there is corroborative evidence as to the cloth which the first accused person was wearing on the material date. Please allow me to move to the next issue. In that reading, I've done away with quite a bit of material, so you will not wait for too long. summarized quite a bit of it. And so the next question is whether the accused was in the first accused was in the deceased house on the material date, and whether he was the last person to be seen with the deceased. Now, considering the evidence of PW7, Lee Owen, his evidence is that the first accused person was in the deceased house. Waridi did not testify, and nothing much can follow on his evidence if he has not been tested on it. But the strongest argument the accused person is advancing is that, look, there were these two other male persons. First of all, there were other people, the Akina Waridis, the Lee Owens, the Kakas. Why were they not also investigated? But he advances another argument. The strappings that were used to tie the deceased, the evidence of the government analyst is that it revealed DNA of two unknown males. These are the people who were in that house, and that Dominic Haron. Allow me to make my observation. But before I do that, back to Lee Owen. You know, Lee Owen is the witness who says, I was with the first accused person. And I needed to find out, why is Lee Owen, how can the court admit or disallow, or what is the weight that this court needs to put on the evidence of Lee Owen as the one who saw the accused in the deceased house? And this is what Owen said. That first of all, he stayed with the first accused person in the deceased house for over 1 hour. That was his evidence. Secondly, the first accused person was using coded language. Thirdly, he had a beard. And fourthly, he had brownish eyes. Then he says, in their conversation with the first accused person on that day, these are the words the first accused person said, and I'll quote, that in their conversation with the first accused person in the deceased house on that day, these are the words that the first accused person said. And I've quoted them verbatim. In reference to another country where they account for everybody, not like in Kenya where you can come and do something and just disappear, and someone can impersonate, since we don't have a database. In reference to another country where they account for everybody, in Kenya you can come do something, just disappear, or impersonate somebody, since we do not have a database. And then, of course, Owen says he identified him on the parade. I'll come to the parade. Other than the evidence of Owen, I sought to find out whether there is any other evidence that would place the accused person maybe in the deceased house. And I came across the evidence of PW25, Chief Inspector Frederick Ngahu. Attacked to the Directorate of Integrated Command and Control Center, and he brought records of the movement of vehicle KCA E03E, the second accused vehicle which the first accused person was using, had indicated, without me having to read in details, that this vehicle was within the subject time and the set time within the Dennis Pritt area, and that is within the vicinity of the commission of the offense. And so, it is the finding of this court that there is evidence the first accused person was within the vicinity of Dennis Pritt area, the vicinity of the commission of the offense, and that corroborates the evidence of Lee Owen of his presence in the house of the deceased. But I have looked at his submissions about the two male and the unknown, and I took time to think about this. And this is my findings and my observation, that we are talking about DNA on straps. And I'll repeat that. We are talking about DNA being found of male on the straps. We are not talking about DNA on the body of the deceased. Hear me out. Straps have taken judicial notice of the fact that there are items that can be purchased from a departmental store, and they can be handled by more than one person: the seller, the buyer, and the end user. And therefore, the possibility of DNA of more than one person being found on these straps is not far-fetched. It's not unimaginable. If we are saying that this DNA was on the body of the deceased, it would put beyond reasonable doubt that those people were in that house and had contact with the deceased. In any case, may I take all of us back to the particulars of the charge? They say, jointly charged with others not before the court. I say no more. But finally, before I move out of that area, the question that we must ask ourselves is, does the fact that there may have been other people who are still at large exonerate the first accused person from blame? My answer was in the negative. Was the first accused person the last person to be seen with the deceased? The doctrine of last seen was discussed in the case of Kimani versus Republic, where the Court of Appeal said this, and I will read it because it's important. The doctrine of last seen alive is based on circumstantial evidence where the law prescribes that the person last seen with the deceased before their death was responsible for his or her death, and the accused is expected to provide an explanation as to what happened. In the Nigerian case of Achi versus Tet, 1993, the court relied on the case of Eastman versus Tet to discuss the doctrine of last seen. And this is what the court said, and I quote, "In the case of culpable homicide, as is in the present one, where the doctrine of last seen has been applied, the law presumes that the person last seen with the deceased before the death was responsible for his death, and the accused is expected to provide an explanation of what happened." The last seen doctrine stands as negation. I will repeat again. The doctrine of last seen stands as a negation and an exception to the doctrine of presumption of innocence. It is therefore tried law that where a victim was last seen by the accused and is found dead, the death of the victim will be presumed, and it will be presumed that the last person he was last seen with is responsible for his death. Therefore, if the first accused person is the one who was last seen with the deceased herein, as testified by Lee Owen, then the first accused person will have the burden to explain what happened to the deceased. Please have a look at the case of Achbong